Anthony Gowing's presentation in The Great Transformation. This follows Jeremy Griffiths' presentation.
Part 9. Tony Gowing describes how the transformed way of living brings about the most fabulous transformation of everyone's life.
Jeremy Griffiths' introduction to Anthony, or Tony for short, Gowing.
Welcome, everybody, to Tony Gowing's presentation about the magnificence of the transformed way of living. Just to introduce Tony, Tony is a talent. I think he got the elephants over the Alps for Hannibal, and he swam with the river dolphins in the Amazon, and I think you live with the gorillas and eating giant celery in Rwanda there for 6 months or something, Tone. And is that right?
Well, getting the elephants over the Alps was the hard bit.
Anyway, Tone could have done those things, actually. But what he did do, what he has done, he's a country boy who turned up at the World Transformation Movement, I think about 17 years ago now, to make sure this understanding of the human condition reaches the world. He's an absolute super weapon of talent, taught himself to write computer coding, to handle marketing, basically anything and everything. So wherever there's the greatest need, that's where you'll find Tony. Above all, Tony is the St. Paul of our movement, your guide to becoming transformed. So please listen closely to the best help you could ever wish for in learning how this understanding of the human condition is able to transform your life and save the world. So, Tony, I'll leave it to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Jeremy. The magnificence of the transformed way of living. Thanks again, Jeremy. I'm totally embarrassed by what you've said about me because I'm nothing in all this. Look, it's very simple. The World Transformation Movement, with the understanding of the human condition it supports, is the most important and wonderful organisation on earth. And I just feel like I'm the luckiest person alive to be able to play any kind of role or part in bringing this information to the world. And Jeremy is the most generous, most uniquely gifted, most sensitive, truly empathetic, honest and insightful and courageous person that anyone could hope to meet. You can absolutely believe me on that. Nothing he ever says or does ever disappoints you. The main thing I've learnt from Jeremy is that this explanation of the human condition is the most important thing that is happening in the world by a million miles. And I do want to say that every part of our insecure, human condition afflicted selves can't help but want to block this information from seeing the light of day. But the absolute opposite has to happen where we live in support of this understanding, because it's the only thing that can save the world. And that's what I love the most about Jeremy, because he just lives to save the world in every breath he takes. And all I want to do is emulate that. He's shown me that I, and we all, can live completely selflessly, just like he does, in support of the dignifying truth that we now finally have of our corrupted condition. So I'm just here to help save the world, because supporting this understanding of the human condition is the only way we can. Now, the first thing I absolutely want to do and absolutely need to do is replay this short extract from Jeremy's presentation, which summarises the essential benefit of finally having the redeeming explanation of the human condition. So this is the key information that makes the whole new world for us humans possible.
While our species' psychological rehabilitation will take a number of generations, what is so spectacularly wonderful is that having the redeeming understanding of our fundamental goodness immediately obsoletes our old artificial ways of defending ourselves against the implication that our corrupted condition meant that we are bad and unworthy. I mean, remember in the interview that I explained using the Adam Stork analogy, how when we were unjustly criticised by our instincts for defying them and managing our life from a basis of understanding, that the only ways we could defend ourselves against our instincts criticism was to prove that we weren't bad by competitively winning as much power, fame, fortune and glory as we could, and by angrily attacking the implication that we were bad, and by blocking out from our minds that implied condemnation. Well, now that we have found the real defence for our corrupted condition of the actual understanding of why we are good and not bad, those old artificial, egocentric, angry and alienated ways of defending ourselves are necessarily obsoleted. Those old defences have done their job and are no longer needed. Indeed, now that we have the real defence for our corrupted condition of the instinct versus intellect biological explanation for why we did that, why we corrupted our instinctive self, and therefore why we are actually good and not bad, it would be completely irresponsible, given the plight of the world, to continue using the now obsoleted and thus now unnecessarily destructive old, artificial, angry, egocentric and alienated ways of defending ourselves. With the real defence for our corrupted condition found, everyone can and now must, if we are to save the human race, abandon our old artificial ways of maintaining our sense of self-worth and instead direct all our abilities and energies to supporting the redeeming understanding of the human condition that we now have, and to adopting the cooperative and selfless and loving new way of living that it has made possible. Indeed, that it has revealed we have no reason not to take up. We let go of our old, now obsoleted, selfish preoccupation with winning power, fame, fortune and glory as the way to sustain our sense of self-worth, and instead focus our mind on living for and through the fabulous, cooperative, selfless and loving new potential that has opened up for the human race now that understanding of our corrupted human condition has been found and our instinct and intellect are reconciled. Everyone now can and has to change, be transformed from being servants of our egos to being servants of humanity. I mean, we had to defensively defy our instincts to find understanding, ultimately to find self-understanding, understanding of why we corrupted our instinctive soul. So our egocentric defensive system was necessary, but now it no longer is. Now, gloriously, what happens when we give up our old egocentric and angry and alienated ways of living and take up the new transformed way of living, where we live in support of the understanding of the human condition, is we discover a freedom we have only ever dared to dream of, where we are no longer preoccupied justifying ourselves and proving our worth every minute of the day, as we actually have been every minute of the day. And as a result, are finally able to access all the true beauty of our lives, of those around us, and of every living thing. I mean, the shackles of the responsibility we have had of having to continue supporting and participating in humanity is immensely necessary and immensely heroic, but at the same time, immensely upsetting, soul-corrupting search for the redeeming understanding of why we defied our instincts fall away, and a whole new world that is effectively free of the agony of the human condition opens up for us. Even though we are not yet free of the psychologically upset state of our personal corrupted condition, we are effectively free of it. Our lives are effectively transformed because it's no longer the focus of our minds. That's the seemingly magic, immediate benefit of having the redeeming biological understanding of the human condition. Everyone, we all, baby boomers, X generation, Y, millennials, Z generations, and alpha generations, are suddenly free to live our lives in support of a non-competitive, non-selfish, non-aggressive, and non-human condition corrupted, denying, peaceful, truthful, human race-saving, cooperative, selfless and loving way of living that is effectively free of the agony of the human condition. So this is how we are quickly able to bring the human race back from the brink of extinction from terminal levels of psychosis.
So there, Jeremy has given us all, in the clearest possible way, the reason for and the benefits of the fabulous transformed way of living that understanding of the human condition has made possible, and is the way of living we in the WTM support and promote. Shortly, I'll talk about the difficulty most people can initially have taking up the transformed way of living, where you let go of your now obsoleted power, fame, fortune and glory ways of validating yourself. But I have to begin because it's so incredible by telling you just how relieving and special it is to be able to live free of the agony of the human condition in the transformed life force state, which is what we in the WTM also call the transformed way of living, because you do turn into an absolute force for life when you take up the transformed life force state. As everyone knows, who has overcome the death effect and been able to access and appreciate Jeremy Griffiths' explanation will know, the ability that it gives us to understand every aspect of human life, including yourself, is absolutely drop dead with relief and excitement, breathtakingly fantastic. The thousands of ecstatic responses under the interview on our WTM's homepage reveal the immense relief and excitement and gratitude of being able to make sense of human existence and know that the human race actually has a path out of the horror situation it is in now. The extent and gravity of which Jeremy has made very clear in part 3 of his presentation. So once you get through the death effect, relief and excitement is the main effect of being able to make sense of everything. And this information really does make sense of everything. What it's done for me is incredible. In the world before this explanation, for me, there were no answers. There was no meaning, no direction, no real understanding. I had no real idea of what to do in the world, no framework of reference, no idea about the meaning of existence at all, in fact. Like every, person, as an adolescent, I had no choice but to resign myself to blocking out the unbearably depressing truth of my and the human race's corrupted condition, and instead pretend life was fine and commit myself to just seeking reinforcement. The process of resignation is explained in Freedom Essay 30. So I honed my own talents of playing sport and striving for financial success or doing well in my chosen career. But underneath all that, I knew my life was actually desperate, a desperate, pain and stress-filled, dysfunctional mess. But now I have complete understanding of human life. I know the good reason why the human race became corrupted, why we destroyed our loving soul. Yes, at the heart of all this amazing understanding, I'm able to understand that despite all the appearances to the contrary, we humans aren't the outcasts, the baddies, the horrors, the downright monsters of planet Earth that we've always worried we might be. I know that there is, in fact, tremendous purpose and meaning underlying everything in the world. So You know, I know now that humans have been on this most wonderful journey of love and courage, and why it has taken such a toll on our species and our planet. I know now why we are the way we are, why the world has been so mean and full of pain. And the wonder and relief of all this understanding is endless. Where everything was just so desperate and disappointing, meaningless, hopeless, depressing, tiring, hurtful, and totally false. Everything, every situation, every person, everything now is just enthusiasm, love, peace, relief, happiness, and excitement. With the human condition at last resolved and our existence made sense of, everything can now be fixed and brought back to life. So it's just beyond, description how wonderful it is to be able to understand yourself and the world. And as Jeremy has just explained, the logical outcome of this redeeming understanding of ourselves is that there now can be a wondrous change of heart in every single human. That I and every human can immediately make this change from being completely consumed by an incredibly insecure, mad, terrified, obsessively egocentric and selfish mindset to a completely 100% secure person, living out an all-meaningful, wildly exciting existence dedicated to helping make this change from darkness and pain to brilliant light and all understanding state of freedom from the human condition. And as this understanding grows and grows, it just becomes more and more obvious how obsoleted all our power, fame, fortune and glory ways of justifying ourselves is. The more understanding enables you to see through what's been going on in your own life and in the world, how dead, horribly and totally and utterly barren and now meaningless it is. The more attractive the transformed way of living becomes, where you're able to leave all that traumatized and now destructive behaviour and way of living behind. The transformation that this relieving, makes sense of everything, understanding of our human condition offers for our whole lives and whole world is truly awesome. And so the transformed state, where you focus your mind on not on making yourself a legend anymore, but on living for a world free of the horror of the human condition, becomes a no-brainer. A wonderful, wonderful, peaceful, satisfying, relieving thing to do. There's just no contest between the true meaning and radiance of what you will be doing, the scale of what you're going to be part of, the unfathomable significance of your life living for this information, as opposed to living for a new marble benchtop or a new car or promotion at work or whatever. So, that's the first point I want to make, that I just can't wait for the whole world to experience what it's like to be free of the relentless, manic, obsessive, dishonest, tyrannical desperation to prove ourselves, which is in truth what our lives have been like, living under the duress of the human condition, and the unbelievable feeling of relief and exhilaration of living free of that in loving service of a whole new life of freedom from the agony of the human condition, for the whole of the human race. We can wake up from the nightmare that humanity has had to endure while it searched for this redeeming understanding of our species' corrupted condition, and live our lives as part of the most wonderful, world-saving, all suffering ending, all loving new existence for us brave and heroic humans. Absolutely, 100%, 100% secure in the knowledge that every ounce of energy that we expend every minute of every day now is going into a completely meaningful and right direction. We don't have to guess or try to be a good person or hope we're doing the right thing. We know we are, because we can at last make sense of human existence. We know in our minds, in our hearts, the path forward is all clear. And how wonderful is that? Enthusiasm, aliveness, and unbelievable energy just pours through our whole being with, like warm sunlight. We can wake up from our human condition afflicted stupor and leave forever our manic, intensely driven, exhausting preoccupation with proving ourselves and constantly making sure that we are feeling good about ourselves and that we've had to live like until now. So at this point, you might think that this is all just sounding like the most new age, utopian, seduced pile of away with the pixies bullshit that you've ever heard. And look, I know it's exactly justified to think that. There have been so many false starts to a human condition-free new world throughout human history. The talk of any of such a liberation is on the nose. It absolutely reeks of delusion and even madness. So being a bit sickened by and put off by what I've been saying is okay. But this is the amazing thing. What I've been saying is actually all true. It's this fabulous, dreamed of, great transformation of our lives from a human condition stricken state to a human condition free life is totally real, because we have actually finally found the fully understandable, first principle based, scientific, biological, human race rehabilitating explanation of our corrupted human condition that makes the transformation of our lives 100% legitimate, real, and right. All that I'm saying is totally verifiable, logical, and rational. I know it's astonishing that this has finally happened, but it has happened. The efforts of everyone throughout the ages have finally led to the all-redeeming and all-relieving and all-healing understanding of the human condition. It's like a miracle, but it is actually very real. We, the human race, are free to leave our upset, corrupted lives behind forever. God Almighty, this is incredible. But get used to it because it's true. And I want to reiterate what Jeremy said in his presentation, that this transformed way of living has nothing to do at all with the deluded, pseudo-idealistic, no understanding of the human condition, totally artificial, totally dangerous, left-wing, socialist, new age, PC, woke movement. And Jeremy, as Jeremy fully explains in his brilliant booklet, Death by Dogma, that is such a dangerous false start to the transformed world for the human race. One of the horrible false starts I was referring to that have discredited this real start to a transformed world that understanding of the human condition actually makes possible. And again, you have the first principle biological explanation of the human condition to verify that it is the real start. There's no naive dreaming or mindless dogmatic enforcement of an ideal world involved. This is all science-based and driven. And as Jeremy has also emphasised, this has nothing to do with religion where people defer to and live through support of the embodiment of the ideals in the form of a denial-free thinking great prophet. This is about living in the support of the understanding of our corrupted condition that actually makes a cooperative and loving ideal world possible. As Jeremy often says, this is the end of faith and belief and the beginning of knowing. So, with understanding of the human condition, we're now able to see and implement a stunningly wonderful, genuine path home for humanity and for ourselves. It is so obvious and clear what to do now. We can truly live with purpose and freedom and joy. All of our old human condition afflicted pursuits can be left in a pile of rubble that they now represent. We know our embattled way of living used to be needed, but now it's no longer needed and is now meaningless, pointless, destructive rubble. That way of living brought us this far, but it's over now. So, let's get the fuck out of the old dead world. Let's dedicate our lives and minds and hearts to freeing the world and freeing ourselves from the hell on earth that Jeremy truthfully described the human condition as being. And living that way is the only way to show the rest of the world the human condition isn't scary anymore. By taking up the transformed way of living, we're embracing the truth of our corruption. We aren't fearfully defying it anymore. And that's the very best evidence that Jeremy's redeeming understanding has at last made the human condition safe. And the more relaxed we are with the human condition inside of ourselves, the more able we are to be honest about it and accept it, the more empathetic we can be towards everyone else's suffering under the human condition. So the more we can help them overcome their initial fear of the subject. Basically, we don't have to feel guilty a second longer. We don't have to manically push all our hurt and fears down and hide it all and lie and pretend and live in hope anymore. What we've hoped for is here. This is it. Our task now is to help others discover this understanding until it has reached every corner of the world. It will be our unbridled enthusiasm, clear-sightedness, and selfless positivity that will build more and more momentum in ourselves and in our group of supporters, and ultimately take this amazing breakthrough to the rest of the world. So let's love the world back to life. With Jeremy's magnificent understanding of the human condition and bring an end to all the suffering, madness, and desperation. Let's go. Coping with Exposure Day or Judgment Day and overcoming the Mexican standoff. So that is how genuinely fabulous the transformed state is. It's actually more wonderful than I can describe, and that's just the truth. What I now want to look at and help everyone with is two particular difficulties most people initially encounter once they overcome the death effect and appreciate the information and are on their way to taking up the transformed way of living. The first difficulty is having our own personal version of humanity's 2 million year corrupted condition, which we've all been coping with by living in complete denial of it, suddenly exposed by the arrival of the explanation of the human condition. As Jeremy described it in his presentation, this is Exposure Day or Truth Day, Revelation Day, Honest Day, or Judgment Day, which, as Jeremy emphasised, is actually a time of compassionate understanding, not condemning judgment. Nevertheless, the sudden exposure of our corrupted condition cannot help but be a shock that has to be worked through. Personally, I'm absolutely chock full of the human condition. I know every cell in my body is infected with the insecurity from being so corrupted, the suicidally depressing guilt and shame of it, which Jeremy's explanation has finally allowed us to let go of. At times I can visualize all the corruption in me and my historic fear of it as a thick, black, sticky substance that has slowly become, more stagnant with age and the experiences of life. And this deep hurt and insecurity, which at its core has been my fear of encountering the truth of my corrupted condition. It's driven my dysfunction, driven my focus on myself, driven my competition with others, driven my egocentric need to fight back and try and prove that I'm a good, worthy and capable person. But as Jeremy has explained over and over again, the key piece of logic we've all got to remind ourselves of, in fact, as I will explain, we have to forge a whole new highway in our brain around, is that we don't have to fear the truth of our corrupted condition anymore. We have the redeeming, 100% compassionate explanation of the 2 million year corrupted state of the human condition that we can now accept the truth of and just let all of our historic insecurities and resulting defensive behaviours go. In fact, as I'm about to explain, our feelings of fear and guilt and shame and embarrassment about our corrupted condition can now be completely flipped into feelings of immense pride, relief and joy. So this great dreamed of breakthrough, understanding of our corrupted human condition is naturally and initially exposing and confronting. But since we have understanding of what is happening when we feel this exposure, we can, with patience, not only cope with the exposure of our corrupted condition, but achieve a state of dreamed of complete release of our shame and guilt about it. In chapter 9.3 of Freedom, Jeremy gives us a full account of the Judgment Day effect of having our corrupted condition exposed. And in chapter 9.7, he gives us a detailed description of how everyone, including the more upset, who have more psychological hurt to be exposed, can cope with this shock of exposure. Basically, with sufficient time to adjust, everyone can not only cope with having their corrupted condition exposed, but be immensely relieved to be able to be effectively live free of their corrupted condition by taking up the transformed state. And as more people make the adjustment to the truth of their own and the whole human race's corrupted condition, the more people adopt the transformed state, there will be more reassurance and support to help everyone cope with their own and the human race's corrupted condition exposed. And the second difficulty in taking up the transformed way of living is that our attachment to our old, now obsoleted, must prove my worth, must establish that I'm good and not bad, must get a win from every situation, power, fame, fortune and glory way of validating ourselves is so habituated and strong that many people will struggle to let go of that way of living and take up the transformed way of living. Again, it will be easier and easier to adopt the transformed way of living the more and more as more and more people overcome the death effect and discover the power of this information to make sense of our lives. And from there, get over feeling exposed by the understandings and discover just how legitimate and necessary and relieving it is to be able to let go of our old insecure must prove my worth defensive behaviours and transform our lives to living in support of these human race saving understandings. However, especially in the early stages of this great awakening of the human race, from a 2 million year long traumatized deep torpor, you can experience what we in the WTM call the Mexican standoff. This is where you know the information is true and all the logic says that you can and should let go of all your artificial ways of validating yourself, but you've become so dependent on and attached to those ways of living that you find yourself unable to let them go. These reinforcements where we gain relief from the underlying insecurity that we carry by making ourselves feel good through winning power, fame, fortune, and glory, and by blocking out the truth of our corrupted condition and by attacking any implications that we are a bad person. These egocentricities, denials, and angers are all artificial reinforcements and coping mechanisms. As Jeremy summarised, the arrival of the real reinforcement of our actual explanation of why we are good and not bad, which is the instinct versus intellect explanation of the human condition, obsoletes these artificial reinforcements. But having lived off these artificial reinforcements, it's natural to initially find it difficult to let them go. So you find yourself in this Mexican standoff where you can't deny that we now have the actual redeeming understanding of the human condition that obsoletes all those old artificial ways of justifying and defending ourselves. But you struggle to accept letting go of those old artificial defences that have sustained and looked after us for so long. To understand the solution to this problem of the Mexican standoff, it helps to really bottom out on just how extremely attached we've become to our old, now obsoleted ways of validating and defending ourselves. And so it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, what you've been doing in your life. The truth is that living with the insecurity about our self-worth that all humans carry as a result of our corrupted condition has meant that every one of us has been spending our whole lives, every second of every day, totally and utterly preoccupied with fighting back against that underlying insecurity. We have had to build intricate facades that we curate with the most utmost attention to detail to protect us from exposure of our seemingly unworthy, bad and evil corrupted condition that Jeremy has finally presented the redeeming explanation of. The truth is, we humans have been completely dedicated to building and maintaining these facades, but because we've been living in denial of our corrupted condition to protect ourselves from these from the unbearable exposure of it, we're hardly aware that we have been totally focused on building and maintaining these protective facades. We like to think that we've been doing all kinds of wonderful things like working and travelling, going to university, supporting a charity, being with family, children, friends, going to parties, etc., etc. But really, the truth is, we've just been using all these seemingly normal aspects of our lives as vehicles to carry out our objective of resisting the underlying insecurity that we aren't worthy beings. And the extremely confronting truth is that this preoccupation has meant that we haven't actually been able to genuinely care about what we convince ourselves we have been caring about in these activities, namely selflessly caring about the well-being of others and the world. We've actually been or only been selfishly caring about how we can use these activities to hold back the suicidally depressing fear that our corrupted condition means we are bad, unworthy people. We're using these activities to bolster our self-esteem. And I know what I've just said can be difficult to hear and accept, but this selfish preoccupation is just a product of the diabolically horrible and desperate situation we humans have been living in, where we've been unjustly condemned as being evil beings when we actually aren't. And therefore, how single-minded and courageous we have all had to be to continue living in that horrifically unjust situation. And the reason for pointing this truth out is not to make ourselves, feel guilty or bad, but to help us be aware of it. Because that awareness is what helps most in being able to let that preoccupation go now that we have the real defense of our the understanding of our corrupted condition. Our great obsession with validating ourselves, with artificially making ourselves feel we are worthy and good, shows how important all the ways we have developed and to validate ourselves have been. We have a seriously strong attachment to our old world wins. So when the logic says we should let them go and adopt the transformed state and we find ourselves in a situation that is actually like two freight trains coming together in opposite directions down a single track in a giant game of chicken. And initially you won't even know these two sides are set on a collision course. One part of you will love this information because you can see how it explains everything and you know that it can and will transform the world. So you want to support it by taking up the transformed way of living. But at the same time, there's this other part of you that just can't cope with the information, that it's all just too confronting and exposing of your corrupted self and totally undermining and stifling of your historic egocentric ways of validating yourself. You'll feel like you're being asked to capitulate, give up, trying to establish that you're a good and not a bad person. And since you, like everyone else, have prided yourself on never giving in to the assertion that you're a bad or unworthy person, you're determined to not having to seemingly give into it now. You in effect say, you must be joking if you think I'm going to stop being proud of all my success in holding at bay the implication that I'm a bad, unworthy person, stop maintaining my trophy room, end my focus on making myself a legend, stop working every second of every day on proving I'm a good person, stop what I've been doing all my life, let alone, let go of everything I've worked so hard to achieve, turn myself into a weak failure in the world. You've got to be joking if you think I'm going to do that. The wrestling match between validating yourself and the transformed way of living, where you let all those ways of validating yourself go and live for and in support of a human condition resolved new world, can be extreme. In fact, it can be so extreme that you may try to resolve it by just pretending you've accepted letting go of your old power, fame, fortune, and glory ways of validating yourself. For example, you might say, I'm already being incredibly supportive of the information. What more can I possibly be doing? The WTM is lucky to have my support. Or even, I need more help from the WTM so I can be even more supportive. But such pretense at having let go of your old validating structure will still leave you stranded in the Mexican standoff. In particular, you'll never experience what happens when you take up the transformed state, which is that you'll have such an incredible freedom of thought and such an incredible enthusiasm for life and such incredible excitement about what is possible for the world, and be so full of initiatives and energy and commitment to the transformed new world. You'll hardly have time to breathe, which is how I feel all the time and why I work so hard for this project all the time. And if you watch Jeremy's behaviour, you'll see that he's living like that, with all that energy and enthusiasm and amazing commitment all the time too, times a billion. A pretend transformation and a real one are a million miles apart. Since what I've just said about the trap of our attachment to your old system of reinforcement is so important, I'm going to try and say it all again, but this time even more forcefully. Everyone will try to both support the new and maintain the old. You know, like go to church on Sunday and then make money and kick heads for the rest of the week. You accept that the human race can't go on the way it's going, that the old world is horrible, destructive and selfish and dying and perpetuating suffering, and that the new world is wonderful and selfless and radiant and integrative and nurturing and sympathetic and empathetic, and that it is the only path forward for the human race. Yet what virtually everyone initially tries to do, as a quote that from Jeremy that I'll include shortly points out, is try to fit the new world into our old world lives. We use the understanding of the human condition to defend our upset, and we go on and on about how upset we are, and how our upset is all defended. We even use the insight that the understanding gives us to increase our old world wins. We try to pretend that we've always loved birds and nature and we're soulful. We've always loved children and been nurturing. We try to tell everyone how much the information has helped our lives and as I mentioned, how much we support the WTM. We'll look on at everyone else and point out how upset they are and silly and crazy and how left-wing they are and off-track they all are, you know, and how we were all always, you know, really genuinely right-wing, etc., etc. But it just doesn't work. The old world and the new world just don't mesh. We're still stuck in the Mexican standoff. So when you're still stuck in the Mexican standoff, you can think that you're living for the human condition resolved new world when you actually aren't. You're still firmly holding on to your old validation structure. Jeremy gives a very interesting illustration of the difficulty of the Mexican standoff in his paragraph 50 of his Shock of Change video and booklet, while emphasising that the transformed way of living is not a religion. He points out that both the transformed way of living and living in support of a prophet in a religion do involve letting go of your preoccupation with your corrupted condition. He then points out that in the case of Christianity, Christ's 12 disciples, who were his first followers, didn't properly see how the faith that Christ was introducing worked. They venerated and worshipped Christ, but that was not the point. The real point of Christianity is to let go your embattled, overly upset, self-preoccupied way of living and instead defer to and live through your support of Christ. Jeremy then made the interesting observation that I wasn't aware of, which is that just as people resist letting go of their upset way of living and taking up the transformed state where you live in support of the redeeming understanding of ourselves. So the disciples also resisted letting go of their upset way of living and deferring to and living in support of Christ, actually complaining that this is a hard teaching, who can accept it? So they saw it as hard teaching and didn't want to accept it. And as Jeremy explained, it was actually St. Paul who came along afterwards, and who I'll talk about more shortly, who realised the immense fall off your donkey relief that living in support of Christ rather than in the way your corrupted condition wanted you to live was how Christianity works. The disciples loved the soundness of Christ, just as people loved the sound understandings of the human condition. But it is living in support of the understanding of the human condition that transforms your life and saves humankind. Unless you take up the transformed way of living, you are not making proper use of being able to understand the human condition. Basically, you're still not seeing the situation you're in clearly. You're just seeing it vaguely from a position where your old focus on validating yourself still holds sway. You want me to change? You must be kidding. I'm not a weak capitulator. Forget it. Now, what was I doing? Which is the same old have to prove you're good and not bad road you've been forcing yourself along all your life. To make the change from your obsoleted old life to the new transformed way of living, you have to see your situation clearly. And through doing that, realise and accept that what you have to do is change the focus of your mind. If you're still mentally framed up supporting your old form of reinforcement, you'll be stuck wrestling with wanting to maintain that. Whereas you have to change to being mentally framed up to focus forward on supporting the fabulous new potential for the human race. The two ways of thinking are incompatible. They are mutually exclusive. So you leave one alone and never look back at it and lock onto the new validation system of living for and through supporting the human condition free new world for the human race. You have to put yourself on the spot. Face your situation squarely. In the old religious terminology, you can't serve two gods. You can't maintain your old selfish focus and take up the selfless, humanity-focused, transformed way of living at the same time. It's one or the other. So there is a path through the Mexican standoff, and that is for your mind to have the right orientation, which is to completely leave behind and forget your old redundant reinforcement system and instead focus on living through supporting a world free of the horror of the human condition, which we absolutely have to do. Because if we don't, the human race will perish through terminal levels of psychosis. And I'm not joking. The point of no return is genuinely only a few short decades away. And if you want to imagine what terminal levels of psychosis looks like, it is 100% of the human race suffering extreme autism, a degree of paralysis and agony and distress that is so terrible. It's unthinkable. So honestly, everyone has to hear about this information and take up the transformed way of living. Yes, people caught in this no man's land of realising the unfathomable importance of these explanations, but allowing themselves to be wedded to their historic defences is actually the ultimate state of wrongness, the ultimate obscenity. Even though wanting to genuinely support this information is what we know we want to do and should do. Attachment to your old validating way of living makes doing that impossible. In fact, remaining in that position without clear awareness of it can build and build and build and cause huge levels of distress. And if left unchecked, it can even force you back into living in the old cave of denial, and even worse, make you attack the information and the WTM. You can read about the danger of that in Freedom Essay 56, why there have been ferocious attacks on the WTM. So this is why all this clear awareness of what is happening to you is so very important. And yes, it really is the ultimate obscenity to hang on to your old, now completely unnecessary, and now world-destroying ways of validating yourself. That old way of living was necessary, but it no longer is. It's done its job. It's now finished with, and immensely destructive to continue with it. So just forget it. And once you clearly see and accept that truth, you will find you actually can let go. You can, let that now obsoleted and destructive way of living go, and take up the transformed way of living, where you live for and through supporting the new human condition resolved world. And again, and the most significantly and importantly, when you let go of your old preoccupation with trying to artificially validate yourself every minute of every day, which is what you've been doing, you will discover an absolutely incredible freedom you didn't believe, you couldn't dream could be possible. And this will happen because the immense burden of guilt about being corrupted that has actually been weighing you down, and the whole human race down for 2 million years, will be lifted off your shoulders, which is actually how you become a transformed life force, a person living effectively free of the burden of the human condition. And you'll feel all the relief and excitement and enthusiasm that I described at the beginning of my presentation. Taking up the transformed state saves the human race. That's the benefit to humanity. But its fabulous benefit to you is that you will feel 50-ton weight lifted off your shoulders and experience a state of freedom and exhilaration and excitement we humans have never been able to allow ourselves to think could even exist while we're having to participate in humanity's immensely upsetting, heroic battle to find redeeming understanding of the human condition. Yes, you can't experience the fabulous new while you're still worshipping at the altar of the dead as doornails old. In paragraphs 1198 and 1199 of his book Freedom, Jeremy explains how when St. Paul gave up his insecure, destructive battle to prove he was a legend by deferring to Christ, he was overcome with such relief he was metaphorically struck blind for 3 days and fell off his donkey. And Jeremy uses what happened to St. Paul to tell us how even more justified and relieving it is now to be able to let go of our struggle with the human condition. And I'm here to tell you just how true that is. When you get this, when you actually let go of the battle, when you metaphorically go blind with relief for not just 3 days, but forever and ever, you'll fall off the back of not just one donkey, but millions of the long-eared little fellas. Understanding the human condition has the ability to completely and permanently free every human on earth from the agony of the human condition. We are all free now. You and everyone else just have to realize that and take your freedom. I should mention that a clarification that Jeremy makes about the transformed way of living in paragraph 20 of The Shock of Change, which is that the focus of leaving the old world of artificial reinforcement isn't on giving up your possessions or walking the streets in sackcloth in self-denial and servitude. We're talking about a change of mindset that can have an effect on your priorities, which can affect your choice of possessions and so forth. But the focus isn't on self-deprivation. The absolute best description of how not try to serve two gods, of our old selfish way of validating ourselves and the new selfless transformed state, but instead letting the former go, is this passage from Jeremy's Freedom Essay 33, where he says, what happens is you don't actually try to get this understanding of the human condition to mesh with your power and glory way of living. You don't try to get one to accommodate the other, which is actually what you've been doing. That's why you're at odds with this transformation. Even the words at odds suggests there's a war between the two. That's the mistake you're making, because what you do is you actually leave that whole wrestling match completely and go to another place that's free of the wrestling match. The mistake you've been making is wrestling with this, trying to get the transformed state to marry or coexist with your old way of sustaining yourself. But in fact, they're incompatible. They can't coexist. That's the thing you're missing. You give up, and even saying give up is inferring that you're still involved with the battle. You just leave the whole war alone and you go and live in another place. Trying to get one to accommodate the other was completely wrong. That's the mistake. You don't. You just leave the whole wrestling match alone. And once you understand that, it makes a world of difference. You just leave that battle as is. The transformed state has nothing to do with it. You go and live in a place that's free of that battle. And as I'll now explain, you're not only free of the wrestling match, you go and live for the project, living for getting the information to the world, and that sustains you. That's what you live off in this fabulous state, free of that deadening egocentric existence. So you can see that whole presentation in the video in Freedom Essay 33 by Jeremy, and it's just so helpful, and you can learn so much more about the Mexican standoff and how to overcome it in Jeremy's video and booklet, The Shock of Change, and also in the FAQ 1.23, and especially in Chapter 9 of Freedom. How absolutely wonderful this transformed way of living is. So, going back to what I said at the beginning, just imagine when you can truly give yourself with all your heart and soul and mind to freeing the human race from the human condition. You don't have to think about it, worry about who you are or what you're doing. You know what you're doing. You're living for the understanding that saves all the children on earth from ever having to resign, to die inside themselves, from having to endure the human condition, basically for a future that is kind and loving. You're able to be with others and not compete or feel like you don't understand them or feel that they don't understand you. You don't have to drive yourself day in and day out to keep busy, to not think, or project the best possible impression of yourself. We'll genuinely love ourselves, and we will genuinely love and understand each other. We'll be living in harmony with the world, with nature, with all the animals and plants, not as destructive outcasts anymore. All the problems on Earth will no longer be insoluble. It's just so beautiful to think about the future and to know that we can participate in as much as we want. And the more we participate, the better we're going to feel. And the sooner the world will be safe. Our job is to build a wonderful island of sanity that this fabulous understanding creates in us, compared to the sea of madness everywhere else in the world. So we just take up any task, anything at all, no matter how small, something that will help build momentum in this, in any way. Write a post or comment on the WTM's Facebook group. Send an email or a hard copy of the interview or freedom to a thought leader. Give $1 to the advertising campaign. Clean up our own lives, our human condition afflicted lives. You know, the more centered we become on our task, the more generous to others and humanity we can be, the more everyone will notice and ask what the difference is. We now have the ultimate meaning in our lives to live for, and the more we live that meaning, allow it into our lives, the more momentum, happiness, freedom we'll be helping to build. And we don't have to feel insecure or guilty for feeling wonderful. Not one bit, because it's not a lie. We won't be pretending. We won't be putting on a show. This will be the most real thing we've ever been part of in our entire lives. To start with, it might feel a bit strange because it's so new, but soon it won't feel strange. It will just be bliss day in, day out. What a complete change that is. The great change of heart that Sir James Darling trained Jeremy to give us. Now, before finishing, I would like to just give credit to Annie Williams, who was the inspiration for my transformation. I remember saying to myself, I just want some of that freedom and excitement that she's found. You might like to watch her absolutely wonderful transformation, affirmation at humancondition.com/Annie-Williams-affirmation, where you will see she confirms everything I've been saying. And which makes me think, you know, how true Sir Lawrence van der Post, what Sir Lawrence van der Post said, which Jeremy quoted in his book, How Lawrence van der Post Saved the World, about women initially being more able than men to acknowledge a denial-free thinking, truthful thinking prophet. And he said, not by the men, but by the women who flock to him and their obedience shall you first know the true prophet. Yes. And men's greater attachment to their egocentric power and glory defences means they tend to be slower than women in taking up the transformed way of living, which does mean women have a big role to play in leading humanity home to freedom from the human condition. So now I'm just going to finish by reading this wonderful anticipation of a transformed state-led, human condition-free world from the great denial-free thinking prophet Joel, who Jeremy quotes in paragraph 1259 of Freedom. And it's just glorious to think of this. Like dawn spreading across the mountains, a large and mighty army comes, such as never was of old nor will ever be in ages to come. Before them, the land is like the Garden of Eden. Behind them, a desert waste. Nothing escapes them. They have the appearance of horses. They gallop along like cavalry, with a noise like that of chariots, like a mighty army drawn up for battle. At the sight of them, nations are in anguish. Every face turns pale. The reconciling truth is shockingly confronting and exposing at first, but those who have progressed past the shock stage are filled with excitement about being transformed and having the capacity to end human suffering and devastation happening on earth. They charge like warriors. They scale walls like soldiers. They march in line, not swerving from their course. They do not jostle each other. And in that day, the mountains will drip new wine, and the hills will flow with milk, and all the ravines will run with water. So, yes, we all march in line, not swerving from our course, all together, and no one jostling each other. And as I said earlier, the more people that discover this explanation of the human condition and take up the transformed way of living, the easier and faster will be the human race liberated dawn spreading across mountains of the world. So let's go. let's go. Let's get out of this hell on earth of the human condition. I suggest you now watch the video of the Akratides family of WTM Melbourne describing the therapy they've derived from being able to understand the human condition, and then see further wonderful examples of and instructions about humanity's transformation on our transformation page at humancondition.com/transformation. Also, the transcript of Jeremy's, my, and the Akratides videos are all presented in the Great Transformation booklet, which is freely available on our website, or you can purchase from bookshops like Amazon.